Tonight is the birthday banquet of the 70-year-old Mrs. Washington, the matriarch of the Washington family. Many grandchildren, granddaughters, and grandsons-in-law have brought gifts. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you are watching from in the comments section below. Grandma, I heard that you love tea. This century-old Pu'er tea brick is worth 500,000 and is my birthday gift to you. Grandma, I heard that you believe in Buddha. This Jade Buddha is carved from Hetian Jade and is worth 700,000. Old Mrs. Washington looked at the various gifts and laughed, making the whole family happy. At this moment, Mrs. Washington's eldest grandson-in-law, Paul, suddenly said, "Grandma, can you lend me $1 million? Aunt Vero from the orphanage has uremia and needs money for treatment." The entire Washington family was shocked. Everyone looked at Paul with incredulous eyes. This live-in son-in-law is too courageous, right? It's Lady Washington's birthday. Not only did he not prepare any gifts, but he even dared to ask Lady Washington to lend him $1 million? 3 years ago, the late Mr. Washington found Paul from who knows where and insisted on marrying his eldest granddaughter, Cynthia Washington, to him. At that time, Paul was penniless, just like a beggar, and he's still the same now. After the two got married, the old master passed away. Since then, the Washington family has been trying to drive him away. However, Cynthia is indifferent and isn't moved by other people's insults, so he has remained a live-in son-in-law in the Washington family. It is out of desperation that Paul is asking Lady Washington to lend money today. Aunt Vero from the orphanage, where he was taken in and saved, has uremia. Dialysis and a kidney transplant require at least $1 million. He really had no choice but to speak to Lady Washington. He felt that today, being Lady Washington's birthday, she might be kind and willing to help since she is in a good mood. Unexpectedly, old Mrs. Washington, who was laughing just a second ago, immediately pulled her face down. She threw the teacup in her hand to the ground and shouted angrily, "You bastard! Are you here to celebrate my birthday or to borrow money?" Paul's wife, Cynthia, hurried forward and explained to Lady Washington, "Grandma, Paul is ignorant. Please don't be angry." With that said, she was about to pull Paul aside. At this time, Cynthia's cousin, Jennifer, sneered and said, "Sister, look at what kind of rubbish your marriage is. Kelvin and I are just engaged and not yet married, but Kelvin gave Grandma a Hetian Jade Buddha. Your husband didn't bring any gifts and still has the nerve to ask Grandma for money." "That's right, Brother Paul. We are both grandsons-in-law of the Washington family. You, as the eldest grandson-in-law, are really a failure," said Jennifer's fiancé, Kelvin, the young master of a large local family. Although Kelvin was about to marry Jennifer, he thought that Jennifer's appearance was miles away from Cynthia's. Cynthia was a well-known goddess in Oris Hill, but seeing the goddess marry this worthless man was upsetting to Kelvin. "This kind of garbage, it's best to get him out of our Washington family as soon as possible." Yes. The Washington family's face has completely lost this guy. I think his intention to borrow money is fake. He just wants to ruin Lady Washington's birthday. Paul couldn't help clenching his fists when he saw that the entire Washington family was targeting and insulting him. If not for the medical expenses for his savior, he would have turned around and left this place of fake extravagance and pomp. However, remembering his father's teachings since childhood about repaying kindness, he tried to suppress the humiliation in his heart and said to old Mrs. Washington, "Grandma, saving a life is better than building a 7-story pagoda. Please be merciful." Someone snorted coldly and cursed, "Paul, don't try to win Grandma's favor. If you want to help someone, find a way yourself. Don't make Grandma pay to help you save people. Who do you think you are?" It was Jennifer's brother, Philip. He and his sister always had strong opinions about Cynthia, who surpassed them in every aspect, so they liked to seize every opportunity to mock Paul. Cynthia looked a little embarrassed and said, "Grandma, Paul lost his father when he was 8 years old. Aunt Vero from the orphanage brought him up. He wants to repay her out of gratitude. Please help him. Old Mrs. Washington said with a dark face, help him? Okay, I will, but only if you divorce him and marry Mr. Kingsley. If you do, I will immediately give him 1 million. Lady Washington was referring to Kingsley, who had been pursuing Cynthia. The Trump family was an upper-class family in Orris Hill, much more powerful than the Washington family, and Lady Washington always wanted to curry favor with them. At this moment, the housekeeper ran in and said loudly, Mr. Kingsley sent a birthday gift. A carved jade amulet from Lauken worth 3 million. Mrs. Washington was overjoyed and blurted out, bring it quickly, let me see. The butler immediately handed over an emerald green jade amulet, and everyone present gasped in surprise. The jade amulet was emerald green, crystal clear, without a trace of impurities, and looked like a first-class genuine product. Kelvin, who had sent the Hetian Jade Buddha, saw the jade amulet and felt a bit awkward. Unexpectedly, Kingsley, who had nothing to do with the Washington family, had been so generous. Old Mrs. Washington happily played with the jade amulet and said merrily, oh, Mr. Kingsley is really interesting. If only he could be my grandson-in-law, I would wake up smiling in my dreams. Then she looked up at Cynthia. How about my condition? Would you consider it? Cynthia shook her head. Grandma, I will not divorce Paul. Mrs. Washington's expression instantly turned stormy, and she angrily cursed, don't give me that attitude. Must you hang on to this rubbish? Get him out of my sight. He is not allowed to stay at my birthday banquet. Paul was completely disappointed. He had no face left to stay in the Washington family at this point, so he said to Cynthia, Cynthia, I will go to the hospital to see Aunt Vero. Cynthia hurriedly said, then I will go with you. Old Mrs. Washington cursed at this moment, if you leave, I will disown you as my granddaughter. Take your parents and your mother, and get out of the Washington house with this waste. Cynthia was startled and didn't expect her grandmother to say such harsh words. Paul hurriedly said, you stay, don't worry about me. With that, he turned around and walked out before Cynthia could recover. Hanks laughed behind him, oh my good brother-in-law, leaving hungry? Won't you go to the streets to beg for dinner? Don't let our Washington family lose all its face. Here, take a coin and buy a steamed bun to eat. Hanks took out a coin and threw it at Paul's feet. The entire Washington family burst into laughter. Paul gritted his teeth and left the Washington family without looking back. When he rushed to the hospital, Paul immediately went to the payment office, wanting to communicate with the hospital and inform them that the medical expenses would be delayed for another 2 days. However, when he asked the nurse, he was suddenly told that Aunt Vero had been sent to the best hospital in Eastcliff overnight. Paul was shocked and hurriedly asked, how much does it cost? I will find a way. The nurse replied, a total of 3 million is needed. 1 million has been paid, and there is still a gap of 2 million. It must be paid within a week. Who paid this million? The nurse shook her head. I don't know. Paul was surprised and was about to figure it out when he turned and saw a man in a black suit with gray hair, about 50 years old, standing behind him. With eyes locked, the man bowed to him and said, young master, you have suffered for so many years. Paul frowned, as if his demeanor had changed, and asked coldly, are you Stephen Thompson? The man replied in surprise, Mr. Paul, you still remember me. Paul's expression froze, and he murmured, of course I remember. I remember every one of you. Back then, you forced my parents to flee Eastcliff with me. During that time, my parents died unexpectedly, and I became an orphan. Why are you looking for me now? Stephen Thompson replied painfully, young master, when your father passed away, old Master Wade was also extremely sad. He has been looking for you for many years. Now that everything is settled, he wants you to come back with me. Paul said coldly, you can leave. I will never see him in my life. Stephen Thompson asked, "Young master, do you still blame Master Wade?" "Of course," Paul said word by word. "I will never forgive him in my life." Stephen Thompson sighed and said, "Before I came, Master Wade said you might not forgive him. That means he has self-awareness." Paul replied. Stephen Thompson said, "Old Mr. Wade knows that you have suffered over the years, and he wants to compensate you a little. If you don't want to go back, he will buy the largest company in Oris Hill and give it to you. In addition, he asked me to give you this card. The password is your birthday." With that, Stephen Thompson handed over a Citibank premium card. "Mr. Paul, there are only 5 such cards in the country." Paul shook his head and said, "Take it away, I don't want it." Stephen Thompson replied, "Mr. Paul, for your savior, you still have a shortfall of $2 million in medical expenses. If you fail to pay, her life may be in danger." Paul frowned. "Are you deliberately setting me up?" Stephen Thompson hurriedly said, "I wouldn't dare. If you accept this card, it will be enough to pay the money." Paul asked, "How much money is in this card?" Mr. Thompson said, "This card is for you as a little pocket money, not much, a total of 10 billion. 10 billion? Paul was stunned. He knew that his grandfather's family was rich, but when he was young, he had no idea about money. He only knew that the Wade family was one of the top families in Eastcliff and in the country. But he didn't know exactly how much wealth they had. At this moment, he understood. 10 billion was just pocket money, and for the entire Wade family, he feared it would be more than 1 trillion. To be honest, he was deeply moved. But thinking of his parents' deaths, which Grandpa couldn't avoid blame for, he couldn't forgive him. Stephen Thompson saw his hesitation and hurriedly said, "Master, you are the heir of the Wade family. You deserve this money. Strictly speaking, it belongs to your father." Master said, "If you are willing to go back, you will inherit the trillions in family properties. If you don't want to return, this money will be given as your living expenses." Oh yes, Oris Hill's largest enterprise, the Emgrand Group, with a market value of 100 billion, was wholly acquired by Raja yesterday. Now all the shares are in your name. You can go to the Emgrand Group for the handover by tomorrow. Paul was in disbelief. Was the Wade family's investment too big for him to handle? 10 billion in premium cards, 100 billion for the Emgrand Group. Although Oris Hill hides dragons and crouching tigers, the only true giant is the Emgrand Group. Any family must bow down in front of the Emgrand Group. It is the emperor of Oris Hill's business field. Even the Washington family and the Blue family, who humiliated him today, as well as the Kingsley family, who pursued Cynthia, were all small in front of the Emgrand Group. Unexpectedly, it now belonged to him. At this time, Stephen Thompson handed him a business card and said, "Mr. Paul, you may need to calm down and think about it. I won't bother you anymore. This is my phone number. Please let me know if you need anything." After speaking, Stephen Thompson turned and left. After he left, Paul was still in a daze. He didn't know whether to accept the Wade family's compensation. But thinking about it carefully, after all the humiliation he has endured over the past 10 years, and the humiliation from the Washington family, why shouldn't he accept the compensation given by the Wade family? Moreover, Aunt Vero's medical expenses still needed 2 million, and it was urgent. Thinking of this, he gritted his teeth and immediately returned to the payment office. "Hello, I want to deposit the 2 million. Swipe the card, enter the password, the transaction is successful." 2 million was easily credited to the hospital's account. Paul felt as if he were in a dream. Had he become a billionaire? Returning home in a daze. The family was in an uproar by this time. Cynthia and her parents did not live in the Washington villa but in a very ordinary building. They had been driven out since Cynthia married him and old Mr. Washington passed away. His mother-in-law was yelling at home, "Paul is rubbish. He made us lose face today. If you don't divorce him, your grandmother will drive you out of the Washington group. Cynthia said, I will find another job when I leave. You, said her mother angrily. What's so good about that rubbish? Why can't you divorce him and marry Kingsley? If you marry Kingsley, our family can be proud. Her father added, yes. Marry Kingsley and our family will immediately become valuable in front of your grandma. She will curry favor with you every day. Cynthia said, don't say anything, I won't divorce Paul. You stubborn child. At this point, Paul entered the room. When they saw him, his father-in-law and mother-in-law didn't look pleased. His mother-in-law snorted coldly, a rubbish, and you still have the face to show up. Paul sighed inwardly. His mother-in-law had always looked down on him. But if she knew he was now the boss of the Grande Group and had 10 billion in cash, what would she say? However, Paul was not ready to reveal his identity. He had been away from the Wade family for many years, and who knows what the Wade family was like now. What if someone in the Wade family was unfavorable to him if he exposed himself? Therefore, it was better to keep a low profile for now. So he lowered his head and said apologetically, Mom, I'm sorry, I caused you trouble today. His mother-in-law scolded, you are more than trouble, you are ruining our family of 3. Can't you be a little self-aware and get out of our house? Cynthia hurriedly said, Mom, how can you say that? Paul is your son-in-law. Rubbish, his mother-in-law said bitterly. I don't have such a useless son-in-law. The farther you go, the better. Cynthia pushed Paul and said, hurry, go to the room. Paul nodded gratefully and fled back to the room. He and Cynthia had been married for 3 years, but in a strict sense, they had never really lived as husband and wife. Cynthia slept on the bed while he slept on the floor next to her. This night, Paul couldn't sleep for a long time. What happened today was really shocking, and he wouldn't be able to digest it for a while. Before going to bed, Cynthia said to him, how is Aunt Vero? I still have more than 100,000 in savings. You can take it to her tomorrow. Paul replied, no, someone has already paid for Aunt Vero and sent her to Eastcliff for treatment. Really? Cynthia said in surprise. Aunt Vero is saved? Yes. Paul said, Aunt Vero has done good and accumulated virtue throughout her life and helped so many people. Now someone has finally repaid her. That's good. Cynthia nodded and said to Paul, you can breathe a sigh of relief. Yes. Cynthia continued, I have to go to sleep. Recently, the company has had a lot of things going on, and I'm so tired. Paul asked, what's happening at the company? Cynthia explained, the business is not doing very well. Grandma has always wanted to cooperate with a large company like the Grande Group, but the Washington family is much weaker, and they look down on us. Paul suddenly thought of the Grande Group and asked, the Washington family has no cooperation with the Grande Group? Cynthia laughed at him and said, how could the Grande Group ever look at the Washington family? Even Jennifer's fiancé and Kingsley's family can barely catch the attention of the Grande Group. Grandma counts on them to help connect the Washington family with the Grande Group after they get married. Paul nodded. It seemed that the Washington family had been eager to cooperate with the Grande Group. However, Mrs. Washington couldn't even dream that the Grande Group now belonged to him. Thinking of this, Paul decided to take over the Grande Group first and then help Cynthia through it. She was too bullied in the Washington family. As her husband, he had the responsibility to help her improve her status in the family. From now on, your husband is different from before. I will never let anyone look down on you again. I will make the entire Washington family bow to you. Early the next morning. After Paul finished cooking, he rode his little e-bike to the Grande Group. He parked the little e-bike next to the parking lot of the Grande Group. As soon as the bike was locked, a black Bentley car slowly parked in a parking space opposite. Paul looked up inadvertently and saw a pair of young man and woman walking down the car. The man is dressed in high-end suits, they look very stylish, and the women are coquettish. Although a bit gaudy, they are also rare beauties. It turned out to be Cynthia's cousin Jennifer, and her about-to-be engaged fiancé, Kelvin, the eldest of the Blue family. Paul didn't know what Jennifer and Kelvin were doing in the Emgrand group, but in order to avoid trouble, he still prepared to hide away. Unexpectedly, things are hiding more and more. The sharp-eyed Jennifer immediately saw him and shouted loudly, "Oh, brother-in-law." Jennifer's brother-in-law yelled extremely cordially, but Paul couldn't help but he strode faster after hearing it. Out of courtesy, he could only stop, and when the two approached, he smiled and said, "Jennifer, why are you here?" Jennifer giggled. "I and Kelvin came over to meet with Doris, the vice-chairman of Emgrand Group." After that, she looked at Kelvin with admiration and said, "Kelvin's family has a lot of cooperation with the Emgrand Group. In the future, not only will it help the Blue family, but also our Washington family." Paul didn't know that the Blue family had a cooperation with the Emgrand Group. After all, the Emgrand Group had just become his industry and had not had time to understand it. But he didn't show it, just smiled and said, "The prince has an extraordinary temperament and a good strength. You are really talented and beautiful." Kelvin Blue looked at Paul contemptuously, and couldn't help feeling injustice in his heart. This stinky rug was scolded by Mrs. Washington yesterday as a dog, and today he has a hippie smile like a okay person. Why would a stunning beauty like Cynthia marry such a useless waste? If it weren't for this useless man, he would definitely pursue Cynthia desperately, and how could he be engaged to this inferior Jennifer in every respect? Thinking of this, Kelvin was upset, and deliberately asked, "What did brother-in-law come to the Emgrand Group for?" Paul said casually, "I'm looking for a job." "Looking for a job?" He sneered and said, "Why do you want to find a job in the Emgrand Group?" Paul frowned. "What does my job search have to do with you?" Jennifer called Paul to stop, just trying to sarcastically sarcasm him. Seeing that Kelvin had started first, she immediately sneered, "Why, is Kelvin wrong? For academic qualifications, do you have a diploma? If you want a job, do you have any achievements apart from your uselessness? If you come to the Emgrand Group to apply for a security guard, they will not want a waste like you. If you are a little self-knowing, you might as well go picking up rubbish on the street. You can earn 2,000 or 3,000 at least a month." After speaking, she threw the drink bottle in her hand at Paul's feet and hummed, "Hey, don't say I don't take care about you, pick up this empty bottle and sell it for money." Kelvin smiled and said, "Although you are rubbish, since you are a relative, then I have to take care of you as much as possible. It just so happens that I have some friendship with the vice-chairman of the Emgrand Group. Why don't I help you with 2 good things and let her arrange it for you? A job cleaning the toilet?" Paul smiled coldly and said, "The kind of job I am looking for, you don't need to worry about it. You should worry about yourself. Emgrand Group is a large enterprise. I believe they will not cooperate with you with such low-quality garbage." Kelvin suddenly got furious. "Who do you say is rubbish?" Paul said disdainfully, "You are rubbish." After speaking, he was too lazy to talk to Kelvin, and walked into the Emgrand Group building. Drafting it, "Stop for me." Kelvin quickly followed, and caught up with Paul at the elevator entrance. He wanted to teach Paul a good lesson, but at least slapped him twice to let him know the fate of people offending him. But when he saw that he was already inside the Emgrand Group building, he was worried that doing something here would anger his partners, so he had to temporarily dismiss the idea of teaching him a lesson. He gritted his teeth and said, "I will let you go for a while today, and you won't have such good luck next time." Paul snorted coldly, stepped into the elevator, and said to him, "Gerald, do you think you are powerful? Believe me, you will soon know the cost of arrogance." "Fuck you." Kelvin stepped into the elevator. Jennifer gave him a hand and said in a contemptuous tone, Kelvin, don't take the same elevator with this kind of rubbish, lest you get smoked by the stench on his body. Kelvin nodded, knowing that he couldn't do something with him here, so he said coldly, letting you go, I want you to look good next time. Paul took the elevator directly to the top floor where the chairman's office was. On the side of the Grand Group, Stephen Thompson had already arranged it for him, and the person in charge of docking with him was a woman named Doris Young. Doris is well known in Oris Hill, and she is the most famous career-oriented woman in Oris Hill. Not only is she beautiful, but she is also very capable of working. She has been promoted to the vice chairman of Grand Group at a young age. She has contributed to Grand Group's existence today. Now that the Grand Group has been acquired by the Wade family, the original chairman has abdicated, and Doris stayed and prepared to assist the new chairman. When she saw Paul, Doris was shocked. She didn't expect that Paul would be so young and handsome. After that, she did not dare to delay, and immediately said respectfully, Mr. Wade, please come to my office. Paul also saw Doris for the first time. He had to admit that Doris looked stunning. At the age of 27 or 28, she had a slender and plump figure, an alluring beauty, and a noble, capable temperament. Paul sat down at Doris's desk and said, I won't come to the Grand Group often in the future, so I want you to preside over the overall situation. Please don't reveal my identity. Doris knew that the Paul family in front of her was extraordinary, and an Grand Group was nothing but a small matter to his family. It was normal for him not to want to manage it himself. So she hurriedly said, Mr. Wade, if you need anything in the future, you can just tell me. At this moment, a female secretary knocked on the door and said, Miss Doris, a man named Kelvin has brought his fiancée to visit you. Doris immediately said, I'm seeing the distinguished guests, let them wait first. Paul asked her, do you know this Kelvin? Doris hurriedly said, his family is a partner of ours, and their main business depends on us. They have always said they would come to visit, and they have been here several times. Paul said coldly, from now on, the Grand Group will no longer have any business dealings with the Blue family. All ongoing and preparatory cooperation will be suspended. If the Blue family earns even a cent from the Grand Group, you, the deputy chairman, will have to pack your things. When Doris heard this, she was suddenly frightened. She didn't need to ask to know that someone from the Blue family must have offended the young master. So she nodded immediately and said, Mr. Paul, don't worry. I will order the termination of all cooperation with the Blue family now. Paul snorted and said, tell them that Grand Group will not cooperate with low-quality garbage, and then let the security guards drive them out. Outside, Kelvin and Jennifer were waiting excitedly. The Blue family had always wanted to become a strategic partner of the Grand Group, so they especially hoped to get closer to Doris. But unexpectedly, Doris's secretary came with several security guards. Kelvin couldn't help asking her, hello, will Miss Doris have time to see us? The secretary looked at him and said coldly, I'm sorry, our deputy Doris said Grand Group will not cooperate with low-quality people like you. From now on, we are canceling all cooperation with your family. What did you say? Kelvin was stunned for a moment, astonished. Why did this sentence sound so familiar? Oh, right. When he was in the parking lot just now, Paul also said the same thing. What does Miss Doris mean? Why should they stop cooperating with the Blue family? Kelvin felt his brain congested. What happened? Terminate all cooperation? More than half of Blue's profits came from the Grand Group. If the cooperation is terminated, wouldn't the family strength be cut in half immediately? He could not accept this reality and shouted, I want to see Miss Doris. I want to ask Miss Doris face to face. The secretary said coldly, I'm sorry, our deputy Doris won't see you, and you won't be allowed to step into the Grand Group in the future. Kelvin scolded angrily, did you deliberately play with me? We are long-term partners of the Grand Group. How can we terminate cooperation like this? The secretary ignored him and said directly to the security guards around him, "Take them out." The security captain rushed forward, grabbed Kelvin's wrist, and twisted it behind him. Kelvin yelled in pain, and the guard yelled coldly, "Get out. If you dare to make trouble in the Grand group, be careful I dispose of you. You are a security captain, dare to yell at me, do you know who I am?" As soon as Kelvin's voice fell, the captain slapped him and cursed, in front of the Grand group, "What are you?" Kelvin was slapped with fierce pain on his face. When he was about to get angry, the phone suddenly rang. The call turned out to be from his father. When the phone was connected, an angry roar came from the other side. "Kelvin, what did you do? Now the Grand group wants to cancel all cooperation with us. Who did you offend?" Kelvin said aggrievedly, "Dad, I haven't offended anyone. I just came to visit Miss Doris, but I haven't even seen Miss Doris's face." On the other end of the phone, Kelvin's father yelled, "The people of the Grand group said the reason they discontinued their cooperation with the Blue family is because you are an unqualified rubbish. Now the family has suffered heavy losses because of you, so hurry back and personally explain to your grandpa." Kelvin was driven out of the Grand group gate by security, holding the phone with a surprised expression. He suddenly thought of Paul and couldn't help asking Jennifer, "Jennifer, is it because of your rubbish brother-in-law? Could he have anything to do with the Grand group?" Huh? Jennifer was taken aback by Kelvin's words. Thinking about it carefully, it might indeed be related to her rubbish brother-in-law. However, he is obviously a waste. Thinking of this, she shook her head and said flatly, "How could he have something to do with the Grand group? He isn't even qualified to come to the Grand group to clean the toilet." "That's right," Kelvin nodded. Thinking of his furious father, he said sullenly, "No, I have to go home quickly." The news that the Blue family was terminated by the Grand group immediately spread throughout Oris Hill. Although it is not known why the Grand group wants to block the Blue family, everyone knows that the Blue family must have offended the Grand group. At this time, the Blue family was over. The Blue family's strength had plummeted by more than half. It was already close to the standard of a first-tier family, but now it had fallen directly into the tail of a second-tier family. When old Mrs. Washington heard the news, she was shaking with anger. She wanted to annul the marriage contract between Jennifer and Kelvin but thought that the Blue family was still more powerful than the Washington family, so she temporarily gave up the idea. At this time, in Doris's office, Paul learned about the whole process and admired her style very much. Paul said with satisfaction, "Doris, what you did just now was very good. Starting today, your salary will be doubled." Doris was surprised and delighted. She hurriedly stood up and bowed to Paul, "Thank you, Mr. Wade." Paul nodded and said, "Also, I want you to announce two things." "Mr. Paul, just say it, and it will be done." "The first thing is to announce the change of ownership of Grand Group and the appointment of the new chairman, but do not reveal the identity of the new chairman, only the last name is Wade. That's what people need to know. The second thing is to announce that Grand Group will invest $2 billion in Oris Hill to build a 6-star hotel. At the same time, it will launch a partner bidding process. Construction and decoration companies in the city can participate in the bidding. The main business of the Washington Group is decoration. Lady Washington dreams of connecting with the Grand Group. Whoever can win the cooperation of the Grand Group will definitely become the most important person in the Washington Group. Now that the Grand Group is his own, of course, he has to give his wife some benefits. The two announcements released by the Grand Group completely shook the entire Oris Hill. Hearing that the Grand Group had changed hands, the Washington family wanted to understand why the Blue family was kicked out by the Grand Group. It seemed that the new owner of the Grand Group still looked down on families like the Blue family. But who is Mr. Wade? Is this person really that impressive? The Grand Group, which has hundreds of billions, buys and buys, and the richest man in Oris Hill is not as wealthy as he is. For a time, countless families were eager to move. On the one hand, they were eager to establish a relationship with this mysterious Mr. Wade, and on the other hand, they longed for their daughters to marry him. In addition, the Emgrand Group's plan to invest in a hotel project of $2 billion also caused a stir in the entire Oris Hill construction and decoration industry. $2 billion. Even a small leftover from that could make a lot of money. Countless companies wanted to get a share of it, including old Mrs. Washington, who was obsessed with money. Mrs. Washington was very excited. This was a great opportunity, a $2 billion project. If the Washington family could get a contract from it, it would truly elevate them to a new level. So she immediately ordered a family meeting to be held at home that night to discuss how to make a breakthrough in the new project of the Emgrand Group. Everyone had to attend. That night, at the Washingtons' villa, because Lady Washington asked everyone to be there, Paul followed. He knew that Lady Washington was going to discuss how to get a share of the Emgrand Group's big project. Therefore, he wanted to take this opportunity to help his wife Cynthia earn some respect. When they arrived at the Washington family villa, Cynthia's cousin Hanks immediately sneered when he saw him. "Paul, you have such a thick skin to show your face to Grandma again." Cynthia said coldly, "Don't talk nonsense." Grandma asked everyone in the Washington family to come. "Paul is my husband and naturally part of the Washington family." Hanks laughed and said, "He's considered half a Washington family. Just a live-in son-in-law." Paul touched his nose and said to Cynthia, "Forget about him, my wife. Don't bother with him. Let's go in quickly, we shouldn't keep Grandma waiting." Cynthia nodded, ignored Hanks, and walked in with Paul. Seeing this, Hank's expression turned cold, waiting for them to make a mistake. After entering the conference hall, Paul and Cynthia found a place in the corner to sit down. Soon, Mrs. Washington stepped forward, and the family meeting officially began. Old Mrs. Washington sat in the main seat, knocked on the table, and said vigorously, "The Washington family has been waiting for an opportunity in the past few years, an opportunity that can make us one of the richest families in Oris Hill. Now, this opportunity has finally come." Mrs. Washington said loudly, "The Emgrand Group has announced a $2 billion project. Whoever can get a cooperation contract from it will definitely benefit greatly. Moreover, this is the first major project of the Emgrand Group after the change of ownership. For the Washington family, it is a great opportunity. If we can cooperate with the Emgrand Group and leave a good impression on the new owner, then the future of the Washington family will be limitless." Although Lady Washington was very energetic, the people below seemed unmoved. In fact, the Washington family had been trying to cooperate with the Emgrand Group for a long time, but the Emgrand Group had ignored them. Now, Lady Washington wanted to get a share of the new project. How could that be possible? Seeing that everyone was silent, Mrs. Washington immediately questioned in annoyance, "What? Are you all dumb? Don't you have the confidence to get a little piece of the $2 billion project?" Everyone looked at her and each other, but no one dared to speak. Lady Washington was even more angry and gritted her teeth, saying, "I will put it clearly, whoever can secure a $30 million cooperation share from the Emgrand Group will become the director of our group." As soon as this remark came out, everyone was taken aback. Lady Washington had always been arbitrary and had never appointed a director in the group. After all, the director had a lot of power and was almost like the successor of the group. Lady Washington was now using this position as a reward, hoping for a brave competition for it. It was clear that she was extremely eager for the Emgrand Group project. However, although the position of director was desirable, it was not easy to get. In the eyes of the Washington family, can you reach a cooperation with Emgrand by getting a contract of $30 million? Don't be kidding. Even if Mrs. Washington goes out in person, the executives of the Emgrand Group will not see her, let alone talk about cooperation. There was silence in the family meeting hall. Seeing this, Mrs. Washington asked angrily, "You are descendants of the Washington family, don't you want to share the worries of the Washington family? After that, Mrs. Washington looked directly at Hanks. Hanks, I leave this to you. Hanks laughed a few times and quickly said, Grandma, even Kelvin's house has been cleared by the Grant group now. Our strength is worse than the Blues. How can we get an Grant group contract? Mrs. Washington suddenly cursed, rubbish. Deny yourself if you haven't tried it. You are more rubbish than Paul. In fact, Mrs. Washington didn't know her own heart, but she didn't want to be the helm of a second- and third-rate clan forever. She dreamed and longed for the Washington family to rise to the next level. And this Grant group project is the only opportunity. Therefore, no matter how difficult it is, she would not give up. She thought that Hanks, as the eldest grandson, would happily take over the task, but she did not expect that he would withdraw at this time. Hanks was also very depressed. Who would take on such an impossible task? He was afraid that he would be kicked out before entering the gate of the Grant group. At that time, not only would things fail, but they would also be ridiculed and laughed at by others, so he decided not to agree in any way. After cursing Hanks, Mrs. Washington shouted and asked, Where are the others? Don't you dare to take this task? Paul lightly touched Cynthia with his elbow at this time, and whispered, Wife, you take this task. Cynthia hurriedly said, It's crazy. It's impossible for the Grant group to cooperate with a small company like the Washington family. Paul smiled slightly and said confidently, Don't worry, you can definitely secure this cooperation. Cynthia asked in surprise, Really? Paul said confidently, Of course. I don't think you have a problem at all. Seize this opportunity, and your future status in the Washington family will skyrocket. Cynthia didn't know why, but at this moment, she believed Paul's words in a bewildered manner. She stood up subconsciously and said to Mrs. Washington, Grandma, I'm willing to try. Cynthia's statement stunned the entire Washington family. Everyone felt that Cynthia must be crazy. Don't try to show off. At this moment, what can be the result besides failure? The Grant group is the largest company in Oris Hill. How can they look at the Washington family? Whoever tries to secure this will never succeed. Hanks couldn't help but sarcastically say, Cynthia, do you think you can get a contract from the Grant group? Hanks's own sister and Cynthia's cousin, Jennifer, also sneered at this moment. Sister Cynthia, what is your status compared to that of the Grant group? You're going to embarrass our Washington family. Someone agreed, that's right, if she is driven out by the Grant group, our Washington family will definitely become a laughingstock in Oris Hill. When Cynthia heard this, her cheeks turned extremely red with embarrassment. Since marrying Paul, her status in the family had plummeted, becoming less important, and she was almost squeezed out. Even her parents had been ridiculed. She felt that if she could secure this project with the Grant group, her position in the family would be consolidated. Most importantly, her parents could also stand tall. But at this moment, being ridiculed by so many people, she couldn't help but feel uncertain. She gave Paul a frustrated look. Why did she listen to his persuasive words? She wouldn't have stood up if she knew. Mrs. Washington was very angry when she heard everyone's comments. After asking several times, no one dared to take this task. Now that Cynthia had taken the initiative to stand up, the group started pouring cold water on her. Although Mrs. Washington had always disliked Cynthia, at this time, she felt that Cynthia was at least willing to share the family's worries, unlike others who only knew how to hide. Especially Hanks, her beloved grandson, who really disappointed her. Because of this, Mrs. Washington's attitude toward Cynthia changed a lot. She immediately said, Since others dare not agree, don't talk nonsense. This time, let Cynthia talk about the cooperation with the Grant group project. Cynthia could only bite the bullet and reply, Don't worry, Grandma, I will definitely give it my all. At this time, Hank sneered coldly and said, What's the use of giving it your all? It's still a shame for the family if you fail in the end. Paul asked with a sneer, Hanks, why are you being negative? Don't you think the Washington family is qualified to cooperate with the Emgrand Group? Hanks didn't expect that Paul would dare to speak at the family meeting and would challenge him. Seeing that Mrs. Washington's expression was also a little angry, he immediately explained, I don't mean that. I just think it's impossible for Cynthia to secure this cooperation. Paul smiled and asked him, then what if she can secure the cooperation? Shall we make a bet? Hanks sneered, fine, let's bet. I'm not afraid of you. Tell me, what are you betting on? Paul said, if she starts to negotiate a contract, you will kneel down and knock your head 3 times in front of the whole family and say you were wrong. If she can't negotiate at first, I will knock my head 3 times for you and say aloud that I was wrong. What do you think? Ha ha ha. Hanks immediately laughed wildly. You rubbish are really looking for trouble. Okay, I'll bet with you. Paul nodded in satisfaction and said, the whole family is here to witness that if anyone backs out, it will be equivalent to wishing death upon their father, mother, grandpa, and grandma. Paul deliberately emphasized the words, dead grandma, because he was afraid that Hanks would back out if he lost. As soon as these words came out, Hanks never dared to go back. That would be like cursing his grandma, Mrs. Washington, to die, and she would not let him off the hook. Okay. Hanks didn't realize that Paul had set a trap for him and instead felt that it was impossible for him to lose. So he laughed and said, the whole family witnesses, I am waiting for you to kowtow to me. Cynthia was startled and kept winking at Paul, but he completely ignored her. Mrs. Washington didn't care about this kind of gambling. Her only concern was whether they could enter the Emgrand Group's cooperation list this time. If they could, she wouldn't mind even if Hanks called Paul his father. So she said, today's meeting ends here. Cynthia, you have 3 days to win the contract, and the meeting is over. Back home, the father-in-law and mother-in-law immediately attacked Paul and Cynthia. The mother-in-law, Elaine, was anxious and blurted out, Cynthia, are you crazy? How can you listen to Paul's rubbish and promise this job in such a confused state? Father-in-law Jacob Washington also scolded Paul, saying, Paul, you rubbish, you have killed my girl. Then, his father-in-law said angrily, if you can't secure the Emgrand Group's cooperation at first, you will definitely be squeezed out by the family. You, this rubbish, will also kneel and kowtow to Hanks in front of the whole family. Don't you realize this? Paul said seriously, Dad and Mom, as long as the contract can be negotiated at first, everything will be resolved. Talk. It's all nonsense. The father-in-law scolded, do you know how strong the Emgrand Group is? How can they possibly look at the Washington family? Paul smiled and said, maybe they can see it. I think it must be possible, and she can definitely secure the contract. The mother-in-law sneered from the side, do you think? Do you think you are the boss of the Emgrand Group? You're just rubbish, do you use any brains? You're still talking here. Seeing that her parents were targeting Paul, Cynthia sighed and said, Dad and Mom, this matter has nothing to do with Paul. I don't want them to look down on us anymore. Haven't we suffered enough grievances over the years? Cynthia's mother blurted out, then you can't agree to this errand. It's not just about you, even if your grandma went, people wouldn't talk to her at Emgrand. Paul looked at the scene in front of him with a wary smile. His snobbish father-in-law and mother-in-law couldn't believe that he was the boss of the Emgrand Group, right? At that moment, there was a knock at the door. I'm coming, Elaine sighed and opened the door. Paul looked around and saw a young man in an Armani suit standing at the door. He was handsome, with a Patek Philippe watch worth at least 3 to 5 million. Elaine excitedly said, oh, it's Kingsley. Why are you here? This person was Kingsley Jones, the son of the Jones family, who had been pursuing Cynthia. Kingsley smiled and said, Auntie, I heard that Cynthia has taken over the cooperation with Emgrand Group, so I came here to give her some advice. Oh. You are really the savior of our family. Elaine was very excited. The look in her eyes was like she was looking at her son-in-law. She hurriedly welcomed him in and said, Kingsley, do you have a way to help Cynthia win the Emgrand Group contract? Kingsley nodded with a smile, ignoring Paul, who was standing by as if he was looking at an ant on the side of the road. He went straight to Cynthia and smiled slightly. Cynthia, you didn't even tell me about such a big thing. But don't worry, Emgrand Group and my company have a cooperation. I will ask my dad to say hello and I will do my best to help you. In fact, Kingsley's father didn't have that much influence. He said this just to impress Cynthia. Cynthia always knew that Kingsley was interested in her, so she said coldly, Kingsley, I appreciate your kindness, but I will find a way. Elaine exclaimed in disbelief, Cynthia, are you crazy? Mr. Jones kindly came over to help you, and this is how you talk to him? Cynthia didn't speak, but Paul asked Kingsley with interest, Mr. Kingsley, I'm curious. What can you do to help Cynthia? The Emgrand Group is so big, it can't be controlled by you. Can you make Emgrand sign a contract with Cynthia? Kingsley sneered contemptuously and said, what do you know? Our Jones family and Emgrand Group have always been in-death partners. From the Emgrand Group's $2 billion project, our family can get at least 1/3 of it. I will have my dad directly allocate tens of millions from this third to subcontract to Cynthia. Wouldn't this help her complete the task? Paul said in surprise, oh. I didn't expect that Mr. Jones's family has such a deep relationship with the Emgrand Group. Kingsley snorted coldly and said, of course. In Oris Hill, who doesn't know that our Jones family works closely with Emgrand Group? After finishing speaking, Kingsley stared at Paul and said contemptuously, Paul, I advise you to leave Cynthia, as a frog at the bottom of the well. A man like you can't give her happiness and will only hinder her path to progress. Cynthia coldly replied, I'm sorry, Mr. Jones, I don't need your help, and please don't speak harshly to my husband. Kingsley was dumbfounded and said, Cynthia, if I help you like this, you still have to face this rubbish? What is he worth that you protect him? Cynthia said seriously, he is not a waste, he is my husband. Kingsley, full of gloom and anger, said angrily, okay. Toast and eat fine wine. I want to see what you can do to solve this trouble. If you can't figure it out, then don't blame me for not giving you a chance. After speaking, Kingsley turned around and slammed the door. Elaine wanted to catch up to explain, but Kingsley had already gone far. She slapped her thighs with anger, pointed to Paul's nose, and cursed, you are so mad at me. What else can you do except for being rubbish and dragging us down? Mr. Jones is so kind to help, but you all got angry and left. Paul said indifferently, Mom, he was just talking. He couldn't get the cooperation of Emgrand Group himself, so how could he help Cynthia? Bullshit. Elaine said angrily. The Jones family can get 1/3 of the Emgrand Group's projects, you know nothing. Paul sneered in his heart. He didn't know what the Jones family could do, but he knew that the Emgrand Group would never have any cooperation with the Jones family. Even if the Emgrand Group and Jones did have a lot of cooperation in the past, from now on, all cooperation would stop. Cynthia didn't know what Paul was thinking and said to her mother, Mom, don't blame Paul. Let's discuss this when I come back from the Emgrand Group. Hey! Elaine sighed deeply, feeling that God was unfair. She married a rubbish husband, and her daughter married an even more rubbish man. What an injustice this is. Early the next morning, Cynthia brought the cooperation plan she had prepared overnight and went to the Emgrand Group with Paul. Looking at the 100-story Emgrand Group building, Cynthia had no idea what to expect. How could a company as large as the Emgrand Group be interested in the Washington family? Not to mention, the Washington family wanted to negotiate a share of $30 million. This felt like a beggar asking a rich man for a reward of 30 million, which seemed completely idiotic. However, since she promised her grandma and accepted the task in public, she had to try something. Seeing that she was very nervous, Paul tidied her hair a little distressedly. "Don't worry, my wife, you can do it, you will succeed." Cynthia said helplessly, "I hope so. You wait for me here." After speaking, Cynthia took a deep breath and summoned her courage to walk into the door of the Emgrand group. Paul watched her leave, took out his cell phone, and called Doris. "Doris, my wife has already gone up. You should know what to do next." Doris said immediately, "Mr. Wade, don't worry, I will definitely satisfy Mrs. Wade." Paul asked again, "By the way, I heard that the Emgrand group has a deep cooperation with the Jones family?" Doris said, "Their cooperation with Emgrand was indeed deep in the past. They also want to cooperate deeply in our new project this time and are submitting their cooperation application materials to me, but it depends on what you mean, Mr. Wade." Paul said coldly, "I don't want to see the Jones family participate in this new project, and I won't have any cooperation with them in the future." Doris hurriedly said, "Don't worry, I will handle it." On the other side, Cynthia walked into the office building of the Emgrand group and waited for an appointment at the front desk. She didn't even know whether Doris, the vice chairman of the Emgrand group, would want to see her. After a while, a female assistant with a graceful posture came over and said, "You are Ms. Cynthia, right? Miss Doris is waiting for you in the office, please follow me." Cynthia nodded. She was still waiting in line to make an appointment, so why was she called in directly? Could it be that Doris knew she was coming? But it didn't make sense. How could a famous person like Doris know her? Although she couldn't figure it out, Cynthia knew that the opportunity was rare and hurriedly followed the assistant. The female assistant took Cynthia directly into Doris's office. Seeing Cynthia, Doris quickly got up from her chair and greeted her respectfully, "Hello, Mrs. Wade, I am Doris, vice chairman of the Emgrand group." Facing the famous Oris Hill superwoman, Cynthia felt a little nervous and said respectfully, "Hello, Ms. Doris, I am here to talk to you about the hotel project. Although the overall strength of our Washington family is not strong, we are really working hard in the decoration business and have a good reputation." As she said this, she nervously handed over a piece of information, saying, "Ms. Doris, this is the relevant introduction and qualification documents of our Washington group. Please take a look." Doris smiled and, after receiving the document, glanced at it briefly and said directly, "Mrs. Wade, I have read your information. I think the Washington family and Emgrand can cooperate." "What? What you said is true?" Cynthia couldn't believe it. "Agreed so soon? How could it be so simple?" Doris smiled and said, "Of course it is true. Although the Washington family's own conditions do not meet the cooperation standards of the Emgrand group, our chairman is very optimistic about Mrs. Wade and is willing to cooperate with you." "Chairman?" Cynthia exclaimed and asked, "Who is your chairman?" Doris smiled indifferently and said, "Our chairman is someone called Wade from the Wade family of Eastcliff." "Wade?" Cynthia frowned and said, "I don't seem to know anyone named Wade, except for my husband." Doris nodded lightly. Paul had told her not to reveal his identity, so she could only say so much. Apart from Paul, Cynthia did not know anyone with the last name Wade, and she had never thought that her seemingly useless husband was part of the Wade family. At this time, Doris said, "Mrs. Wade, let me see if the proposed cooperation share in your information is 30 million? Cynthia nodded quickly and asked hesitantly, "Is that too much?" Doris smiled and said, "Not too much, actually it's too little." Cynthia became even more confused and hurriedly asked, "What do you mean?" Doris smiled and said, "Our chairman instructed me to increase the cooperation share to 60 million. While talking, Doris took out a contract and handed it to Cynthia. "Look, the contract has been prepared in advance, and the total is 60 million. If you think it's acceptable, we can sign it now." Huh? This, Cynthia was truly dumbfounded. She didn't expect that the Grand Group, which seemed out of reach for the Washington family, would take the initiative to prepare a contract for her. Moreover, the contract amount had doubled. Grandma's goal was 30 million, and the contract actually said 60 million. She suddenly recalled that during the meeting last night, her husband Paul had resolutely urged her to take on this task. Why was he so confident? And when they were at the door of the Grand Group just now, she had no confidence, but he seemed confident. Did he already know the result? Who is he? Join me next Friday for episode 2 of this captivating story. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Do you think Paul will tell Cynthia that he is the boss of the Grand Group worth several billions of dollars?